I was rocking my daughter in the quiet of the nursery when my phone buzzed. For a moment, I thought it might be David checking in, but the screen lit up with Richard's name. My heart lifted for an instant. Maybe it was congratulations, or a kind word from the company I had given 15 years of my life to. Instead, the voice that had once guided me now sounded cold, distant. "Jessica, you're no longer needed here." The words sliced through me sharper than any pain I had felt in childbirth. I froze. The baby nestled against my chest, her tiny breath warming my skin. I couldn't even respond. Richard continued, clinical and efficient, as if reading from a script we've restructured. "Effective immediately. Your position is terminated on maternity leave." I forced myself to breathe, to steady my arms so I wouldn't drop the child who had only just entered the world. My mind spun in fragments. 15 years of late nights, missed holidays, weekends buried in reports, all erased in a single phone call. Richard ended with a curt, "Good luck," and the line went dead. I sat in silence, the phone slipping from my hand, resting against the rocking chair cushion. The baby stirred, her soft cry pulling me back. I whispered to her, though my voice shook, "It's okay. Sweetheart, I'm here. I won't let anyone take this from us." David found me still sitting there when he returned from the kitchen. He saw my face, pale and empty, and didn't ask a single question. He just knelt by the chair, placed his hand gently over mine, and held us both. For the first time, I felt what it meant to be disposable. Years of loyalty reduced to nothing more than a liability in Richard's eyes. The cruelty of the timing wasn't accidental, it was calculated, designed to strike me when I was weakest. I kissed my daughter's forehead, her skin soft as silk, and knew I had to stay strong. Yet deep down, something inside me had cracked, a fracture I wasn't sure could heal. And in that silence, David's eyes told me he had already begun to think ahead. The next morning, still raw from Richard's call, I logged into the company portal out of habit. My projects, the ones I had poured my heart into, no longer carried my name. Where lead Jessica Morgan once appeared in bold, now stood lead Richard Hale. The sight hollowed me. It was as if I had never existed there at all. I scrolled further, desperate to find some trace of my years, but every mention of me had been scrubbed clean. Reports I authored, presentations I built, even internal memos. Richard's name was plastered across them like he had written every word. I gripped the edge of my desk, fighting back the urge to cry. By mid-morning, my phone lit up with messages. A handful of colleagues reached out, quick bursts of sympathy tucked between emojis and vague well wishes. "I'm so sorry. Jess, this isn't fair." Yet none dared to call. None dared to stand beside me. Fear kept them silent, chained to their desks, unwilling to risk their own security for mine. That silence stung even more than Richard's betrayal. It told me how fragile loyalty was in that place, how easily people would look away when someone else fell. David sat nearby, his laptop open but his attention fixed on me. He didn't rush with comfort or empty promises. Instead, he asked calmly, "Forward me everything. Every email, every memo." I hesitated. What good will that do? They've erased me. His eyes didn't waver. Then let's keep the record they can't touch. So I did. I forwarded message after message, building a quiet archive of the injustice unfolding in real time. With each click of send, I felt a strange shift, not healing, but a thread of purpose stitching through the despair. David never lectured or scolded. He simply nodded each time another file arrived in his inbox, his silence steady, unshakable. I didn't yet know what he intended, But when he closed his laptop that night with the faintest hint of resolve in his expression, I realized his quiet wasn't just for me. It was for something far bigger. A week later, the sting of being erased was still fresh when a colleague texted me a link. I hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. The headline of a glossy business magazine glared back at me. Richard Hale, restructuring for the future. My hands trembled as I scrolled. There he was, smiling confidently in a tailored suit, speaking about his visionary leadership and the bold decisions that would carry the company forward. My stomach knotted when I reached his words. We need leaders, not caretakers. Caretakers. It was a knife disguised as rhetoric, an insult cloaked in corporate language. He wasn't just dismissing me as an employee, he was dismissing me as a mother, reducing 15 years of dedication to a stereotype he thought would make him look strong. Tears blurred the screen until I could no longer read. I set the phone down, burying my face in my hands. For the first time since the call, I allowed myself to weep without restraint. Not just for the job I had lost, but for the dignity he had stripped from me so publicly. David sat beside me, his silence a steady counterweight to my unraveling. He didn't interrupt. He simply reached for my hand, pressing his palm against mine until my sobs softened. Then, in his even, deliberate tone, he said, "Don't waste tears on him. Just wait." I looked at him through swollen eyes. Wait for what he's already won. But David's expression didn't match my despair. There was something measured in his gaze, something that felt like calculation rather than comfort. He wasn't waiting for Richard to stumble. He was waiting for the right moment to act. I wiped my face and leaned back, clutching our daughter against my chest. She stirred in her sleep, innocent and untouched by the cruelty of men like Richard. Holding her grounded me, reminded me of what mattered most. Still, as I traced circles on her tiny back, I couldn't shake David's words. Just wait. They echoed like a promise, carrying weight I didn't yet understand. The weeks dragged on, each day carrying fresh reminders of what I had lost. Yet while I was home nursing my daughter and trying to rebuild a sense of worth, news of the company began to trickle in. At first, it was a single message from a former teammate, client furious. "Project weeks behind? Wish you were here." Then another 2 senior analysts quit today. Couldn't stand Richard anymore. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Projects stalled, deadlines slipped, and clients who once praised our efficiency now threatened to walk. What had once been a well-oiled operation was unraveling under Richard's arrogance. He tried to spin the narrative, of course. In a staff-wide email, he claimed the delays were due to legacy issues, systems, and practices supposedly tied to my leadership. Reading those words felt like another slap across the face, as if even in absence, he needed me to carry the blame. But I knew the truth. Those systems had held the company steady for years. What was crumbling now wasn't infrastructure. It was trust. And trust, once broken, rarely repairs itself. Whispers began reaching the boardroom. One contact confided that directors were uneasy. They had noticed that the collapse coincided with my departure, though no one dared voice it publicly yet. To acknowledge it outright would be to admit that firing me had been a catastrophic mistake. At night, when the house was quiet except for the soft rhythm of our baby's breathing, I would sit with David and recount every update I received. He listened without interruption, his pen moving across a yellow legal pad, capturing dates, names, and details I might have overlooked. I watched him carefully, the way he cataloged each piece of information, and realized he wasn't merely listening for my sake. He was constructing something silently, a framework I couldn't yet see. The company that had discarded me was starting to wobble on its own foundations. And though Richard still smiled in photographs and boasted in memos, the cracks were there, spreading beneath the surface, waiting for the weight of truth to split them wide open. One evening, as I was folding tiny onesies fresh from the dryer, my phone buzzed with a message from an old colleague. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I could handle another reminder of the world I'd been cut off from. But the text was short, urgent. Check your email. Don't tell anyone it came from me. Inside my inbox was a folder of documents, internal reports, client communications, and flagged financial memos. At the center of it all was a major contract I had once secured, now hanging by a thread. Delivery deadlines had been missed, key milestones ignored. The client had threatened to pull out entirely. I skimmed page after page, my pulse quickening. This wasn't a small hiccup. It was the kind of failure that could sink the company's reputation for years. Richard's response, a statement to the board blaming external factors beyond our control. Reading those words, I almost laughed through my frustration. He hadn't changed. Deflect, deny, and polish his image while everything beneath him rotted. I forwarded the folder to David without explanation. Minutes later, he appeared in the doorway, papers in hand, eyes sharp with focus. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse or gloat. He simply said, "This goes deeper than bad leadership." Over the next few nights, I watched him at the dining table, binder after binder spreading across the surface. He'd already gathered statutes about labor protections, particularly around maternity leave. Now he was weaving in the financial irregularities buried in those documents, funds shifted without authorization, expenses disguised as bonuses, loopholes stretched past legality. I leaned against the doorframe, holding our daughter, and asked softly, "How long have you been building this?" He didn't look up from his notes. "Since the day he called you, I knew what he did wasn't just wrong, it was unlawful." His words carried no drama, no triumph, just certainty. In that moment, I realized Richard's arrogance wasn't just cracking under the weight of poor decisions. It was being documented, piece by piece, in a file too heavy for him to escape. It was well past midnight when I padded softly into the living room, careful not to wake the baby. I expected to find the lights dimmed and David asleep on the couch. But instead, the glow of his desk lamp spilled across the floor. He sat hunched over the table, binders open, pages scattered, yellow tabs marking every other sheet. His pen moved steadily, underlining sections of contracts, attaching notes to financial statements, organizing everything with a precision I hadn't seen since law school. "David," I whispered, startled. "What are you doing?" He looked up, his eyes tired but alert. "I've been building a case," he admitted. "He didn't just fire you. He broke the law." The words hung in the room, heavier than any comfort he'd offered before. My chest tightened. I had known Richard's actions were cruel, but unlawful, that was something I hadn't dared to hope. David pushed one binder toward me. Inside were neatly ordered sections. Unlawful termination, during maternity leave, misuse of company funds, board negligence. Each page told a story I recognized, but now it was framed with legal weight, transformed into evidence that spoke louder than my grief ever could. I traced the tabs with my fingers, stunned by the meticulous work. "You've been doing this all along," he nodded, his voice steady. "From the day he called, and there's more." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim folder. "I own 3% of the company. Small, but enough to call a shareholder meeting. Enough to be heard." I stared at him, my heart racing. He hadn't just been holding me together through this nightmare, he had been quietly arming us for battle. For the first time since Richard's call, I felt something stronger than despair. I felt the ground shift, The man who thought he could erase me with one sentence had overlooked the truth standing right beside me. David closed the binder with a deliberate snap. He thinks he holds all the power. But now, Jessica. The law stands against him. The letter went out on a Tuesday morning, crisp and official, bearing David's name at the bottom. Notice of emergency shareholder meeting. My pulse quickened as I read the draft. The language formal yet sharp enough to cut through Richard's arrogance. David sealed the envelope without hesitation, his movements calm, deliberate. "It's time," he said simply. By Thursday, word had spread. A former colleague texted me, "Richard's furious. Keeps saying it's a waste of time." Another message came minutes later. "He thinks this is your doing." When I imagined his office, I could almost see the smug grin on his face as he dismissed it all. To him, I was still the discarded employee, the caretaker unworthy of his world. I pictured him leaning back in his chair, chuckling as he told his inner circle, "Jessica, she's finished." But what he didn't yet know was that the notice hadn't come from me. It came from David Morgan, shareholder. I wasn't there to see it, but I was told that when Richard finally glanced at the signature line, something shifted. For the briefest moment, unease cracked through his bravado. The name carried legal weight, rights he couldn't brush aside with a smirk. The board received the summons in silence. No pushback, no resistance. Weeks of missed deadlines and angry clients had worn them thin. They were tired of excuses, tired of carrying the consequences of his pride. Behind closed doors, they exchanged glances, waiting to see how far this would go. At home, I rocked our daughter, feeling the tension coil and tighten around us. David sat across from me, reviewing the bylaws once more, his expression unreadable but steady. For the first time, I wasn't the one chasing explanations. I wasn't scrambling to defend myself. The silence that followed the summons wasn't empty. It was a pause before the storm. And in that pause, I could sense the balance of power shifting, inch by inch, toward the reckoning Richard never believed would come. The boardroom smelled of polished wood and old power, a place where I had once fought for budgets and defended my team. Now I returned, not as an employee, but as someone they had tried to erase. David walked beside me, our daughter nestled against my shoulder, her soft weight grounding me. Richard was already there, pacing like a general before battle, when he spotted us. His smirk widened. "This isn't daycare," he scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. I tightened my hold on my daughter, refusing to flinch. David said nothing, simply pulled out a thick file and set it firmly on the table. The sound echoed in the room, louder than any insult. Richard chuckled. "More theatrics. We're here to discuss growth and vision, not old grudges." David's tone was even, but it carried weight. "What we're here to discuss are violations labor laws ignored, funds mismanaged, and breaches of fiduciary duty. Everything in this file is documented. Dates, signatures, numbers." He opened the binder, sliding copies toward each board member. I watched their eyes scan the pages, brows furrowing as the reality sank in. Labor violations tied directly to my dismissal. Unauthorized transfers of company funds. Contracts jeopardized by his negligence. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the soft rustle of papers. No one met Richard's eyes. For years, these same directors had nodded along to his speeches, swallowing his arrogance because it seemed profitable. But now, confronted with facts too sharp to ignore, they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Richard tried to laugh again, but it rang hollow. "This is ridiculous." A vendetta, nothing more. I finally spoke, my voice quiet but steady. 15 years I gave this company. You erased it in one call. Now the truth erases you." David closed the binder, his gaze steady on the man across the table. "The choice is yours. Richard, step down or face the consequences in court." The air in the room shifted, the board leaning toward resolution, their silence no longer his shield. The tide, at last, was turning. Richard's mask finally cracked. His voice rose, sharp and bitter, echoing through the boardroom. "This is nothing but personal revenge. She couldn't handle being replaced, so now she hides behind her husband to destroy me." I felt the words strike like stones, but before I could answer, David leaned forward. His tone was calm, deliberate, carrying no hint of anger. "This isn't revenge, Richard. This is the law. You violated labor protections, misused company funds, and betrayed the trust of every person in this room. Actions have consequences." The board members shifted, their eyes no longer darting away but fixed squarely on him. One by one, they flipped through the binders again, underlining details, murmuring to one another. The weight of evidence was undeniable. Finally, the chairwoman cleared her throat. "The vote is called." Her voice was steady, almost ceremonial. "All in favor of Richard Hale's removal as CEO, effective immediately." Hands rose around the table. No hesitation, no dissent. Richard's face drained of color. For a moment, he stood frozen, disbelief carved into every line of his expression. Then he slammed his fist on the table, muttering curses as he gathered his papers. But no one stopped him. No one defended him. He stormed out, the echo of his footsteps marking the end of his reign. Within hours, the news broke. Headlines flashed across business sites and social media. CEO ousted after firing woman on maternity leave. The story spread like wildfire, each article repeating the same damning truth. The man who had strutted across glossy magazine pages was now disgraced, his career in ruins. I held our daughter as the television replayed his downfall. For the first time in months, the tightness in my chest loosened. Justice had found him not through shouting, not through desperation, but through the quiet persistence of truth. David placed his hand gently on my back. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't truly over. Richard was gone. Yes. But the question remained, what would I do with the space his absence had created, and what place was I ready to claim for myself weeks after Richard's removal? The board extended an invitation I never expected a seat among them, with my role restored, not as an afterthought, but with honor. For a moment, I hesitated. Was this a return to the place that had wounded me, or a chance to reshape it into something better? With David's steady encouragement, I accepted. The first order of business was policy. I spoke plainly, drawing from my own pain. Paid maternity leave was no longer a perk, it became a guarantee. Protections were strengthened for employees vulnerable to exploitation. With systems of accountability no one could quietly erase, for the first time, I felt the walls of that boardroom reflect more than power, they echoed dignity. Months turned into a year, the changes took root, and slowly, the company's reputation shifted. Clients returned, drawn to the stability that had once been lost. More importantly, employees walked the halls with renewed confidence, no longer afraid that family and career had to exist at war. Industry journals began to describe us as a family-first workplace, a phrase that felt almost surreal given where it all began. At the anniversary celebration, I stood near the stage, our daughter perched on my hip, now chattering in baby words. The room buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but all I could see was David weaving his way through the crowd until he reached me. His hand clasped mine, firm and warm, the same hand that had carried me through despair into resilience. I leaned close, pressing my lips near his ear, and whispered words meant only for him. We won together. He smiled, and in that simple exchange, the noise of the room faded. Justice had been served, not by anger or vengeance, but by persistence, truth, and love. Looking out over the company I had helped build, then nearly lost, I realized this victory wasn't just mine. It was ours as a family, as colleagues, as people who refused to be erased. And in that moment, holding my child and my husband's hand, I knew betrayal had been answered in the only way that mattered, with dignity that could never again be taken.